text came through while I was elbow deep in a regulatory compliance spreadsheet so dense it could have been used to pave a runway. My dad needs you in the boardroom. Urgent. No signature, no context, just that. I stared at the screen like it had just insulted my mother. The number was Kyle's. Kyle, the CEO's son. Kyle, whose only qualifications for his shiny new Chief Vision Officer title were a mediocre LinkedIn bio and a last name that came with parking privileges. I hadn't spoken to him directly in weeks. Months, maybe. Not since he called my job paper shuffling with extra steps during a leadership Zoom. My first instinct was to ignore it. I mean, when someone who thinks regulatory timelines are a vibe suddenly summons you to the boardroom, you don't exactly sprint in with a smile. But I'd been iced out for weeks, taken off project calls, looped out of email threads, even uninvited from a strategy offsite I helped create. Maybe this was a reset. Maybe Kyle had finally realized we were careening toward a compliance cliff and wanted my help. A stretch, sure, but not impossible. I threw on my blazer, the navy one with the coffee stain nobody else could see but I obsess over, and made my way down the hall. That awful carpet with the migraine-colored triangles pulsed under the fluorescence like a threat. Each step closer to the elevators brought a new wave of dread, but I forced it down. I was good at that. 8 years in regulatory strategy at a biotech company that treated deadlines like optional reading, you learn to mute your internal alarm bells. Hey, quick pause before I keep going. If you're into stories where the quiet one in the office turns out to be holding the detonator, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and hit like. It's free, it helps the team, and trust me, this one goes somewhere. Anyway, I was halfway to the elevators when Jared caught up to me. Jared, the junior analyst who asked intelligent questions in budget meetings and actually read the footnotes in compliance decks. Good kid, respectful, the kind of young employee you want to mentor if your schedule isn't being hijacked by idiots with legacy surnames. He grabbed my elbow, gently but firmly. Don't go in, he whispered. I blinked at him. What? Don't go to the boardroom, he said again, this time scanning the hallway like he'd just shoplifted insulin. There's a draft presentation already loaded. Your name's all over the risk report. What risk report? They're saying you authorized a trial deviation. He said, big one, non-compliant protocol. It's in the pre-read. You didn't write? My mouth opened, but no words came out. Trial deviation? I hadn't signed anything in weeks. Not since Kyle's team streamlined access privileges by locking me out of our own audit logs. They're saying it's your call, Jared said, voice barely audible, and that you left it undocumented. My stomach dropped so fast I think it took my kidneys with it. I backed away from the elevator button, blinking like I'd just stepped into a migraine. It wasn't just a red flag, it was a damn fireworks show. Jared looked terrified just being seen near me. I shouldn't have said anything. I thought you should know. He turned and vanished down the side hallway, head low, like a spy slipping away from a dead drop. I stood there alone, hearing only the ding of an arriving elevator and the dull roar of my pulse. The urge to march into that boardroom and demand answers wrestled with something deeper, colder. A voice that said, if this is what I think it is, you're not walking into a conversation. You're walking into a noose. I left the building. Didn't even go back to my desk. Didn't grab my coat. Just turned around, walked out the sliding glass doors of Ethon Biotech for what would turn out to be the last time, and drove home with my hands shaking so badly I almost rear-ended a school bus. I didn't cry. Not yet. That came later. Right now I had bigger problems. Because if they were trying to pin that breach on me, then someone had forged approvals with my name, which meant someone had hacked the system, twisted the records, and picked me as their fall girl. And they were about to find out I'd left a paper trail of my own. I didn't even shut the car door all the way when I started digging. My laptop was still connected to the guest Wi-Fi I'd leached from the cafe across the street months ago, bless their unsecured network and my paranoid habits. The moment I opened Outlook, it was like stepping into a minefield I hadn't realized I'd planted myself. Meeting invites I hadn't seen. Attachments I'd never opened. Threads with my name CC'd in, but always too late to reply. Always after the decisions had already been finalized. The deck was right there, labeled innocuously as Quarterly Audit Risk Review. Harmless enough. I opened it, half expecting a sanitized fluff piece full of pie charts. Instead, slide 4 hit me like a crowbar to the chest. Compliance gap, Protocol 7.2 authorization risk level, critical. Signed by K. Densmore, CMO office, my name. My full damn name. On a trial deviation I didn't authorize, attached to a protocol I hadn't even seen since April. They'd made it look routine, like I was just cleaning up a minor deviation. A little paperwork laziness. Happens all the time in biotech, right? Except this was not minor. This was an early-stage human trial on a new immunotherapy with FDA fast-track eyes all over it. Deviating from Protocol 7.2 without documentation wasn't a slap-on-the-wrist error, it was a federal violation. I cross-referenced it with our document management system, praying I'd find something, anything that could explain the discrepancy. But access to those logs, revoked. No warning, Just a big red banner that said, "You do not have permission to view this document." Oh, I see. Kyle's vision included locking me out of the very system my name was supposedly authorizing. Panic clawed its way up my throat, but I forced it back down. I wasn't new to this. I'd seen CFOs cry in front of federal inspectors. I'd seen emails buried, logins misplaced, project managers mysteriously resign when it all went sideways. But this was new. They were using me, my credentials, my signature, my silence, the worst part. They were doing it so sloppily, like they didn't even expect me to fight back. Like I was just a ghost in the system now, too burnt out or too distracted to notice. I'd become the perfect scapegoat. I stared at my own name on that slide for a long time. Kimberly Densmore. 8 years of clawing my way up in a company that didn't even put me in the last holiday newsletter. And then I remembered something, Jared. The only person who said anything. Only one who pulled me aside when it would have been safer for him to stay silent. He didn't know me that. Hell, I barely remembered his last name. But he saw the fire on the horizon and pointed it out anyway. And it lit something in me. I opened my encrypted personal folder, the one I never kept on the cloud, the one I backed up to a physical drive, so old it still had a sticker from my first regulatory audit in 2014. And I started to build a timeline. Slowly, carefully. Every email I had approved, every protocol I'd signed, every deviation I'd personally tracked, documented, and routed through proper channels. I'd forgotten how good I was at this. At seeing patterns in the noise. At catching the tiny fractures before they became fault lines. It's easy to forget when you've been professionally ignored for months. I mapped out 2 months of activity and found my first smoking gun less than an hour in. A time-stamped authorization I allegedly signed on July 9th, at the exact same time I was in a government video conference that required facial recognition login. Impossible, provably false. And if one signature was fake, there were probably more. I wasn't scared anymore. No, scared left the building when I saw the timeline didn't fit. In its place was something colder, something that clicked into place behind my eyes like a loaded magazine. Resolve. If they were going to use my name, they'd have to explain how I signed documents while logged into a federal portal across the city. They'd have to explain why the trial results kept moving ahead when I hadn't cleared them. They'd have to explain how the oversight officer with limited system access somehow became the sole point of failure for a multimillion-dollar experimental drug trial. They wanted me to panic. Instead, I poured a cup of coffee, sat down in my kitchen with the blinds drawn, and started printing out every breadcrumb I could still trace. They picked the wrong paper pusher to frame. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had worn off, and that hollow, metallic dread had taken its place, the kind that makes your fingertips go cold even when the air isn't. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I went straight to my home office, still half decorated from when I thought working remotely would be temporary. The plant was dead, the printer out of paper, but my old hard drives, still humming in the drawer where I kept them, labeled with masking tape like war relics. Q1 audits, trial backups, FDA submission 2023. I powered up my laptop and started pulling records. My private archives were old school, manual exports I'd done for redundancy, which basically meant because I don't trust our IT team to tell the truth. I opened my Outlook folder first, calendar invites, confirmation emails, document submissions. I began lining them up chronologically, every decision, every sign-off, every late-night approval I'd given in the last 6 months. It was tedious, but methodical work has always been my panic medicine. You can't drown in fear if your brain's busy cross-referencing timestamps. The first irregularity showed up faster than I expected. A document supposedly signed by me, Protocol 7.2 Amendment Authorization, dated May 14th. I remembered that day vividly. I'd been at the FDA liaison meeting from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I even had an Outlook invite with my attendance logged by federal time tracking. The system wouldn't have allowed me to log in remotely, yet there it was. My signature. Same time. Same day, someone had cloned my credentials or worse, spoofed the metadata. I checked another one. June 2nd, a secondary approval for expedited batch release. My signature again, except the timestamp was 11:43 p.m. I was in the hospital that night, visiting my sister after her gallbladder surgery. I hadn't touched my laptop, but somehow I'd apparently greenlit a multi-million-dollar shipment. That's when the dread turned into something sharper. Cold. Electric, like a circuit closing. I pulled out my old backups from before Kyle's systems modernization project, back when our database still required multi-factor authentication for every signature. I opened 2 identical forms side by side, one from before the system change, one after, and I saw it immediately. The post-update version had a new field at the bottom, Delegated Authentication ID, something that looked harmless, like a log tag for secondary validation. But that little line was the key. It wasn't tied to an actual employee. It was tied to an API access point, which meant anyone with admin credentials could insert signatures without triggering an alert. And who had that access? Kyle's new automation team. The same clowns who bragged about replacing 3 departments with a few scripts. My stomach twisted, but my hands were steady now. I copied everything, screenshots, metadata trails, old document hashes. I started marking them with sticky notes, RED for forged, yellow for uncertain, green for verified. Within 2 hours, I had a rainbow of corporate rot spread across my desk like a forensic quilt. Then I found the real kicker, a draft email from Kyle to the CEO, buried deep in my archived all-staff folder. It was just one line, accidentally saved to my local cache months ago. Once the compliance backlog is cleared under KD's authority, we can certify for Phase 3 ahead of schedule. That was the moment it clicked. They'd used me not just as cover, but as a human rubber stamp. They needed my name to make it look legitimate to investors and regulators. I wasn't the scapegoat yet, I was the mask they wore while they cut corners. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the monitor, and felt something inside me settle. Fear didn't vanish, but it stopped owning me. I could see the pattern now, the shape of their trap, and I realized something else, something almost funny in a dark way. They thought I'd been too quiet, too obedient, too buried in spreadsheets to notice. What they didn't know was that silence was never surrender. It was strategy. I opened a new folder on my desktop, named it Ethon Backchannels. Then I started compiling everything, emails, backups, Slack exports, even the internal memos I'd printed just in case. Each file was a match, each timestamp another fuse, and as I watched the folder fill up, I finally understood what Jared had really done by warning me. He hadn't just saved my career, he'd bought me time, enough time to turn their forged trail into evidence. The metadata was almost clean. Almost. Whoever manipulated the authorization forms knew what they were doing. Not IT newbie sloppy, not college hacker flair, but something more corporate. Institutional, the kind of edits that rely on plausible deniability, just enough ambiguity to skate past a first audit, maybe even a second. But I wasn't a first audit kind of woman. I was neck-deep in document hashes and signature logs when I spotted it, an anomaly so subtle it would have looked like a formatting quirk to anyone else. A time zone tag that didn't match our internal server settings. UTC 7. Our system ran on Eastern, always had, but whoever inserted that authorization was operating from a machine synced to a different zone. I cross-referenced the activity log. 4 instances, same offset, all occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. Eastern. All tagged with the same internal credential string, sysdeleg auth alpha. It wasn't me. It wasn't even a person. It was a subroutine, a script. That's when I opened the internal system update memo Kyle's automation team had pushed 6 months earlier, back when they'd assured leadership that all compliance processes would be streamlined for efficiency. The memo included a buried footnote I hadn't paid attention to at the time. Delegation functions now permitted via authenticated API with elevated privileges under Executive Compliance Profile. That was my profile, my digital identity. I'd wired it straight into the automation flow so they could run approvals through my name, no password needed, no multi-factor, no oversight. They didn't just steal my authority. They built a machine to impersonate it. My chest tightened not with fear but with something colder, denser, the kind of pressure that feels like silence sharpening into a blade. I backed up every trace, every log with the API key, every mismatched time zone. I printed copies, labeled folders. I made USB duplicates, encrypted and stored on 2 separate drives. But the worst piece, the one that turned my stomach, was the Slack thread. I'd exported it months ago, before Kyle's team had migrated everything to their internal comms platform. It had ended up in a zipped folder I'd stashed in my downloads and forgotten. The file was called SLK Ops Q2 Legacy. Inside was a conversation between Kyle, a systems engineer named Max, and one of the compliance interns whose name I hadn't heard in months, Janessa, I think. Max, can we delegate override auth on the trial protocols? KD's backlog is a mile long. Kyle, if we run it through her profile with elevated trust, it shouldn't flag. Janessa, do we need written approval? Kyle, nah, she'll never see it. Trust me, it's covered. I read it 3 times. She'll never see it. Not she approved it. Not she's in the loop. Just trust me. That thread was dated 2 weeks before the first forged document appeared. I felt my throat go tight. Janessa had left the company months ago. No reason given, no handoff email, just gone, so that was the game. Use my name to push through trial deviations, fast-track batch releases, and bypass federal checkpoints. Let the results move fast enough to keep investors happy. If it all blew up, blame the woman with the digital signature. They were playing with fire. They'd wrapped themselves in my skin to do it. And here's the kicker, no one even asked me. Not once. Not a call, not a heads up, not even a drunken happy hour confession. They counted on my professionalism to keep me quiet, on my loyalty to make me doubt myself, on my isolation to keep me from seeing the full picture. But they forgot one thing: I build compliance systems. I don't just follow them. I compiled the Slack thread, printed it on high-quality stock, and slipped it into a folder labeled Whistle 1. That's when it hit me. This wasn't internal politics anymore. This wasn't about a ruined career or a black mark on my record. This was criminal. Forged trial documents, manipulated metadata, API-based impersonation of an oversight officer, all tied to a live experimental immunotherapy trial with federal oversight. If this went public, it wasn't just jobs on the line, it was indictments. And somehow in the middle of all that, I felt calm. Not relieved, not safe, but ready. They thought my silence was weakness. It wasn't. It was the sound of me loading the gun. It had been a Tuesday when I filed the disclosure. I remember because the office was unusually quiet, Kyle's team had all gone off-site for one of their blue sky vision retreats, which was code for bottomless mimosas and a whiteboard of buzzwords they'd later staple to someone else's work. I was alone in the compliance suite, a ghost with a badge and a laptop, watching as the new automation protocols wormed their way deeper into the systems I used to own. They'd pushed the update live without a review. No version control, no rollback protocol, no audit trail for the new delegation logic. I flagged it internally. Twice. The tickets disappeared, closed as redundant, non-blocking, or my personal favorite, Kim's just being cautious. Yeah, I was, damn right I was. But even then I hadn't thought fraud, not yet. I just knew something smelled off, like when you open the fridge and nothing looks wrong, but the milk has a whiff of regret. I'd been in this game long enough to know what early-stage rot feels like, and whatever they jammed into our compliance pipeline didn't pass the sniff test. So, I did what no one expected me to do. I went around them. I used my personal credentials, not my Ethon ID. I logged into the federal portal from my home network, late at night, in sweatpants and fury. The Office of Scientific Integrity had a secure disclosure intake, rarely used, mostly for researchers flagging falsified data or grant abuse. I'd only ever seen it referenced once, back when we were onboarding for a Phase Roman 2 with European partners. I uploaded the system logs before the update, screenshots of the protocol changes, a summary of the delegated override functions. I didn't accuse anyone by name. I didn't need to. I framed it as a systemic concern, a significant deviation from standard digital oversight safeguards. I closed the file, encrypted the receipt, and emailed a copy to myself from a burner account. Then I deleted the email, cleared my browser cache, and stored the disclosure certificate on a USB drive labeled recipes. It wasn't courage. Not then. It was self-preservation disguised as paranoia. I had no idea how deep it would go. I just knew I couldn't trust the systems anymore, and I couldn't trust the people running them. I never heard back. Not a ping, not a confirmation beyond the auto receipt. For months, I assumed the report had vanished into the bureaucratic void, where well-meaning whistleblowers go to die. But now, sifting through forged approvals and Slack threads with my name on them like a posthumous signature, I realized that Knight had been more than defensive. It had been preemptive. They thought they'd built the perfect fall girl narrative. A mid-level compliance officer, slowly phased out, whose name just happened to be on all the wrong documents at all the wrong times. What they didn't know, what Kyle never even thought to ask, was that I'd already lit the fuse. My sealed disclosure was time-stamped, signed, and logged with federal authentication. Anything done in my name after that filing would be cross-referenced against a report I submitted. A report that clearly stated, the system is compromised, and my credentials are no longer reliable without direct confirmation. And now, I wasn't just uncovering fraud. I was proving premeditation. I pulled the USB from my desk drawer and inserted it slowly, like a sacred key. The file opened instantly. Discal Seal OSI 239KD PDF, date, April 11, time, 2247 EST, filed by Kimberly Densmore, subject. Systemic irregularities in compliance automation protocols, request for confidential review. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. That document, that single PDF, was now my insurance policy, my firewall, and my detonator. Every crime they'd committed under my name was going to hit a wall of legal immunity I'd erected months before they even realized they needed a scapegoat. And I finally understood why I'd done it. It wasn't just instinct. It wasn't just caution. It was because I'd seen this play before. I'd watched how these stories end. For the woman in the room who raised her hand too early or too late, the one they called difficult for asking too many questions, the one who didn't smile enough while they rewrote her authority out from under her. But not this time. This time, I'd buried the fuse myself, and I wasn't planning on stopping the explosion. The first crack came in the form of a calendar update. I wasn't supposed to see it. My internal access had been temporarily restricted after I'd opted out of Kyle's third consecutive vision alignment sync. But I still had a shared access link to the Executive Ops calendar, tucked inside an old onboarding packet from the days when people still looped me into things. It blinked onto my screen while I was cross-referencing another forged protocol. GC exit interview confidential 9:00 a.m. General Counsel. Gone. No warning. No announcement. 1 minute she was posting conference selfies in branded lanyards. The next she was being escorted out under a confidentiality flag. I stared at it for a full minute. The woman had weathered 3 CEOs, 2 acquisitions, and 1 very public HR meltdown. She didn't leave. She survived. unless the water had finally risen above her head. I toggled over to my bookmarks and refreshed Ethan's investor relations page. The Q&A scheduled for Thursday? Cancelled. Not postponed, not rescheduled. Just gone, quietly erased like a crime scene scrubbed before the cops arrive. That's when the Slack pings started coming in. Not to me, of course, I was still locked out, but through the private account of a friend in regulatory affairs. He screen capped and sent them from his personal phone with the kind of guilty haste that told me he didn't want to know more. Screenshots of project leads whispering about external inquiries, finance leads requesting documentation logs, and someone from clinical ops asking flat out, "Are we under investigation?" There it was, the ripple. The moment the water started churning before the shark breaks the surface. I hadn't said a word, not publicly, not internally. I hadn't called HR or legal or even Jared. I just waited. The way you wait after striking a match and tossing it into a locked room. There's a beat of silence before the smoke curls out from under the door. And then my phone buzzed. Not a number I recognized. Just a LinkedIn notification. Paul Kravitz sent you a message. I blinked. Paul Kravitz was a partner at the Office of Scientific Integrity. I only knew his name because he'd given a keynote once at a compliance summit I attended years ago. I clicked. Miss Densmore, moving forward, your documentation was sufficient. Please confirm you're available for future contact as needed. You will not be named unless you elect to be. Thank you for your diligence. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the tab, locked my laptop, and sat in silence with both hands folded in my lap. Not satisfaction, not yet, just the weight of confirmation. The bomb had gone off, quietly, precisely. No smoke, no fire, just consequences rearranging themselves in other rooms. The next day, my name started disappearing from things. Slowly, like someone deleting their browser history 1 tab at a time. The risk report presentation got a silent update, my name removed from slide 4. A new investigative committee was formed. Kyle stopped posting his insufferable leadership quotes. And me? I posted nothing. I said nothing. I didn't clarify or speak out or deliver some heroic LinkedIn post about ethics and perseverance. I waited, because people who need to tell the world they were right usually weren't. That afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. Not the usual FedEx tap and dash. This one was firm, measured. I opened it to find a courier standing in a dark jacket, holding a thick envelope with my name in block letters. No return address. I signed, closed the door, set the envelope down on the kitchen counter like it might be ticking. I didn't open it, not yet. I already knew what it was. Official correspondence from the investigation team, possibly a subpoena, possibly confirmation of whistleblower protections, possibly both. Either way, it meant one thing: the walls were moving, and I had never felt quieter or more vindicated in my life. The boardroom smelled like polished desperation, leather chairs, overbrewed coffee, and that sterile, recycled air that somehow makes even multimillion-dollar fraud feel mundane. Kyle stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled just enough to hint at effort without actual work, hair perfectly messy in that curated way only nepotism could afford. The screen behind him glowed with a title slide: Operational Setbacks and Corrective Vision. Compliance Rebuild Strategy. He actually said the phrase corrective vision with a straight face. 12 people stared at him, a mix of investors, legal, 2 board members zoomed in from vacation homes, and 1 twitchy HR exec who looked like she'd just discovered her entire career was built on a termite nest. Kyle cleared his throat, tapped his remote, and advanced to the next slide. We've identified key missteps in oversight procedures, he began, pacing with a swagger that said I read half a book on leadership last night. Unfortunately, some of those lapses trace back to systems approved by former team members, no longer with the company. He let the phrase "no longer with the company" hang in the air like a fart in church. Kimberly Densmore, he continued, was responsible for maintaining compliance architecture during the system overhaul. Since her resignation, he never got to finish. The door opened. No knock, just the sound of the handle turning with finality. A woman stepped inside, black blazer. Federal badge? Her presence sucked the oxygen out of the room so fast someone near the end of the table audibly choked on their biscotti. She didn't speak, didn't introduce herself. She walked straight to the general counsel, new one, not the woman who bailed, and handed over a sealed folder with a red tag marked Federal Disclosure Authority Confidential. GC's hands shook as he peeled it open. No one breathed. He read 1 paragraph. That's all. 1 paragraph. And his face turned the color of printer paper left out in a thunderstorm. He didn't say anything. Just closed the folder, slid it back toward the agent, and looked directly at Kyle. "What is it?" Kyle asked, his voice wobbling for the first time. The GC didn't answer. "Is that about Kimberly?" Kyle pushed. Still nothing. An investor leaned forward. "Is she under investigation?" And that's when the general counsel finally spoke. Voice flat as a legal memo. "Kimberly Densmore is not the subject of any inquiry." Kyle blinked. But her resignation, she didn't resign, the GC cut in. She recused herself formally per federal disclosure standards. The room went silent again. Someone shifted in their chair. One of the Zoom board members muted their mic, probably to swear. Then the GC added, almost too quietly to hear, Her sealed documentation predated the compliance updates. That was it, no dramatics, no gasps, just a series of dawning expressions, confusion giving way to unease, then dread. Kyle looked at the screen behind him. His slide still glowed, key missteps, legacy oversight, failures Densmore. He clicked to the next one, hands visibly shaking now, but the room had shifted. Nobody was looking at the slides anymore. Nobody was taking notes. And nobody mentioned my name again, not once. It was like I'd evaporated. My identity scrubbed from the narrative, my ghost finally breaking the fourth wall. I wasn't their cautionary tale anymore. I was the reason the room had stopped breathing. The CEO's face was the color of raw liver. He slammed his hand on the table so hard one of the investors' cappuccinos did a full-body shiver. I want a name, he barked. If she didn't do it, who the hell did? Nobody answered. Not immediately. Kyle opened his mouth, probably to spout some smoothed-over corporate jargon about transitional oversight or decentralized responsibility, but the general counsel raised a hand before he could utter a syllable. I think, the GC said evenly, you should hear this. He pulled the sealed folder back toward him and unfolded a single sheet. Not the whole packet, just one page. A photocopy of a notarized paragraph written in plain, unflinching language. The kind of paragraph that doesn't hedge, doesn't stall, and doesn't care about the job you're trying to save. He cleared his throat and read aloud. On the 11th of April, Kimberly Densmore, acting as named compliance officer, identified systemic manipulation of digital oversight logs following unauthorized updates to compliance software by non-vetted personnel. Said manipulations are inconsistent with Protocol 7.2 and carry potential violation risk under federal regulatory guidelines. Officer recused herself and submitted sealed disclosure to the Office of Scientific Integrity pending external investigation. Silence followed, thick and tar-like. The kind that drips down the walls and stains reputations on contact. One of the board members leaned back slowly in his chair, like he suddenly didn't want to be seen next to Kyle. Another investor scribbled something onto a legal pad and underlined it twice. The CEO blinked. His mouth opened, closed. What do you mean recused? He finally muttered. She filed the disclosure herself, the GC said, now looking directly at him, before the deviations occurred, before the automation changes were finalized. Kyle was pale now, the kind of pale that comes before someone throws up or passes out. She never said anything she wasn't supposed to, the GC interrupted, louder this time. That's the whole point of a sealed submission. It triggers confidentiality protections and locks her out of internal tampering risk. If she'd said anything after filing, she'd have compromised the investigation. But we have authorizations, Kyle blurted. Her signature is on them, I saw the metadata myself. Every approval using her credentials post-April 11th, the GC said slowly, is now considered presumptively invalid, which, given the software logs and the API trail, also makes them potentially criminal. The word criminal hit the room like a dropped guillotine. One of the Zoom board members cut their video feed entirely. Another turned up the volume. The CEO turned toward Kyle, eyes wide with something between rage and terror. You said she signed off on it all, he whispered. You said she was on board. I thought I didn't, Kyle stammered. You used her name like a goddamn signature stamp, the GC snapped. Do you have any idea what that means for us, for our trial certifications? For investor disclosures? Nobody moved. The slide deck behind Kyle was still frozen on a chart titled, Projected Recovery Strategy Q3 to Q4. Underneath it, Kimberly's name, still labeled Legacy Risk. The irony was almost poetic, because now, instead of being the scapegoat they could bury, I'd become the firewall they couldn't breach. They'd built their entire defense on the idea that I was asleep at the wheel, a lazy or negligent officer too checked out to notice the car had left the road. But I hadn't just noticed. I'd filed the damn traffic report, and now that disclosure, my quiet, time-stamped, federally sealed memo, was their undoing. Everything authorized in my name since April 11th wasn't just tainted. It was inadmissible, null, a paper ghost dragging chains through every department that had relied on it. The company would need to recertify every decision, revalidate every trial submission, re-audit every log. I wasn't the weak link. I was the tripwire. And they'd march straight over it in designer loafers and inherited job titles, never once thinking to ask who laid the wire in the first place. The headline was buried, 4 paragraphs down in a sanitized press release, but I saw it. Chief Vision Officer Kyle R. has been removed pending an ongoing federal inquiry into Ethon Biotech's compliance practices. The board declined to comment further. Just like that, removed. Not fired, not disgraced, removed like an appendix or a particularly stupid mole. No name, no photograph. Just a footnote in a crisis management operation trying desperately to make it sound like the company sneezed, not imploded. I scrolled further. No mention of me directly until paragraph 7. A regulatory strategist's sealed disclosure earlier this year triggered the current investigation, preserving trial integrity and protecting future FDA partnerships. That was me. The nameless strategist, the ghost in the machine, the woman they tried to turn into a scapegoat, who instead became the one clean signature left standing. I closed the article, leaned back in the chair on my back porch, and took a sip of tea, mint, fresh from the little potted bush I'd bought months ago and never had time to prune. Now it was wild and fragrant, stubbornly thriving in spite of my neglect. It was late afternoon. The sun filtered through the branches overhead, casting soft shadows across the garden stones. The neighborhood was quiet, kids in school, dogs dozing behind fences. I should have felt something bigger, triumph, rage, vindication burning like a bonfire. But what I felt was stillness, because I knew and now they knew. The CEO stepped down 2 weeks after Kyle was ousted, claimed health reasons, but everyone saw the writing on the SEC filings. The board promised a restructuring plan, new compliance hires, outside counsel reviews, the usual theater. Jared texted me the day the press release dropped. "You saved us all, I mean that." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply right away, not because I didn't believe him, but because I knew he was the one who started this, really. A hallway warning, whispered just in time from someone who could have stayed quiet. That's how systems fall apart or hold together, not in the boardrooms. In the moments when someone decides not to look away. Later that evening, I opened my laptop, just out of habit, checked email. 2 new messages, both flagged priority. One from a mid-sized biotech firm based in Denver, the other from a regulatory consultancy in DC. Both had read the press release. Both wanted to talk. Each subject line said roughly the same thing: we read everything. And I knew they meant it. They didn't just want my name. They wanted the foresight, the fireproofing, the unsexy vigilance that kept trials from going off the rails. The stuff they never saw coming until it saved them. I didn't reply right away. I closed the laptop, set it aside, and listened to the wind in the trees. The birds weren't singing. Just the breeze, rustling leaves, and the faint buzz of a neighbor's mower a few houses down. I took another sip of tea and watched the steam curl upward. You needed me in the boardroom, Kyle. You just didn't know why. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.